Hi, I'm Peter Hirshberg, and boy, there were so many great themes in that film tonight. I thought what we do is maybe have, I'm going to have each of you just introduce yourselves and talk about the role that you play in this city, in the ongoing film saga that is this city, and then we're going to get into things. And perhaps as you introduce yourself, tell me the lesson you took away from that film. We'll start with Jeremy, who is with the San Francisco Planning Department. So kind of the framing of this here is that here is this film about making and tradition and how difficult that is to survive in a time of change, right? And then there's the cultural side of this because he's preserving culture, and there's the economic side of this. These are not the professions of tomorrow, but they still remain important professions. So Jeremy is in the planning department in San Francisco, which is wrestling with how do we preserve spaces that have former manufacturing space and what role do they have to play in the future. Very strong tensions today. We're also joined by Azalina, and how do I pronounce your last name? Eusope, who is a woman who runs, well, you could say she runs a small business. She runs an emerging restaurant empire in San Francisco, which expresses itself both in retail restaurants and through distribution. What I learned about that film is that what he went through in that film is probably what every small business owner goes through in dealing with this city. So we're going to learn a lot from you. And then from the library here is Cathy Cormier, who runs a program here that exposes people and kids to making these capacities. But let's learn from each of you. Jeremy, talk to me a little bit about kind of the tensions that you're facing in the city, and what did you take away from that film?
Well, thanks for coming out, everyone. As Peter said, I work in the planning department. And while there's a number of dimensions I think any small business person has to deal with, I work on the land use portion, so what governs what people are allowed to do and where on a certain piece of land. I think what I took away from that was this sort of plight and real kind of challenge of coming up against this sort of faceless bureaucracy, which sometimes feels like I'm a part of, right? Like there's 13,000 some employees in the city of San Francisco, right? And it's really, really hard to affect change or make your way through it, especially if your passion is your art or your business and not navigating City Hall. And so I think it was really, really hard, but also illuminating to watch from the perspective of a business person and an artist, and someone who's really passionate about cultural heritage, to face these things and to understand the implications of some of the policies and laws that I help create on an individual. That was hard, I guess, to watch. I also am really glad that he has that. I mean, he can kind of meditate on hammering away every day. I mean, it seems like without that kind of passion or commitment to something you love, it would drive you insane. So I think, I don't know, for being in a planning department, I think it's really illuminating to watch that.
And you're dealing with these issues in real life. You should talk about the fact that we have this mechanism in the city called PDR, which is what? Production, distribution, repair. It's what we hold for making and for manufacturing and for these kinds of things. And this is a very real struggle that you have been living with that's really at the core of kind of how this stuff applies in San Francisco.
That's right. I mean, if everyone's surely aware of the housing crisis in San Francisco, the same kind of principles apply to the affordability of manufacturing space or spaces for distribution, whether it's a sort of a warehouse or a taxi fleet or food delivery. And repair shops, they're all facing the same affordability crisis. And in the past, I think we've zoned for industrial lands, right, because of noxious uses, right, to keep chemicals and smoke out of neighborhoods. Now we're zoning desperately as these industrial lands kind of have fled the city, or the hardcore industries have fled the city. and everything gets more expensive, and the housing and office markets are driving the real estate landscape here. We're zoning not to keep the chemicals away from the residents, but to keep the residents away from the few small businesses that can afford to live here. So there's this steady sort of encroachment of really expensive land costs and construction costs on small businesses, whether it's food or other material production or distribution centers. So it's a struggle, and even if you build space and call it PDR, right, production, distribution, and repair, it's our term for light industry, more or less. Even if you build it, the rents that you get these days, even on the market rate rents, they can't cover the costs of building it. So it's a real pickle. How do you build these things or incentivize the market to build spaces that are affordable for businesses?
And if you look at these, there's some segments, for example, blacksmithing is probably a tough thing to get support of, and yet things like food production, food distribution, food service, and innovative food is if anything has its wind at the back, it's that in this maker economy. And this is something that, Azalina, you are at once thriving in and feeling all the pressures of. So you can tell us a little bit about both what your food business that you're growing and your reaction to this film, and also the reaction you had on the phone the other day when you started expressing your thoughts about dealing with, say, our bureaucracy.
Well, the story of Matt is very relatable, right? Like he's been doing this for generations. It's part of his DNA. I am a fifth generation of street vendor, so that's been in my blood, and I get to do it here, and I get to tell the story here in my adopted country. But running a business here is so challenging as running a business in Canada or even in Malaysia. But I think being a passion-driven business, it takes certain personality and certain assertiveness to fight with the city of San Francisco. I love you very much. But this is the thing, like we do not get support from the city or the government or whatsoever, even though it's a thriving business. It's not really a thriving business. It's a challenge. It's running a food business or any small business is just like life. One day it's up, the other day you're just down. Like, it just depends on how you look at it and how you want to move forward with it. Just like Matt, he has this small community and friends that support him forever, and that's kind of the driving force behind of it. I have great friends that have actually supported us, not the city or the small business loan center. I had friends that have donated thousands of dollars for us to build our facility that we have now in Bayshore. And that's, like just from that, we just grew our business, bootstrapping, sweat, blood, and tears. And then slowly and surely now, we're on our 10th year of the Azalinas business. Now we're reaching to growth part. It's not an empire, Peter. It's just, it's like one step at a time. It's about sharing a story and just like what Matt's doing, and that's how you see a small businesses. But the thing is, I wish the city of San Francisco will really emphasize on artisanal small businesses like us, because we're keeping the economy inside the city. We hiring jobs that we hope that can keep this employee here in the city while they're working with us. But we're trying that all. How far it's gonna go, I don't know, but so far we've been doing a good job. We have about 65 employees right now. They're all living in the city of San Francisco. It's not easy though, it sounds very exciting and very sexy. It's not sexy at all. It's quite a hustle, and we want to make sure that we do the best we can, but we can't do it if it's not part of the community and the friends that have been the backbone of the business. I hope I'm answering questions.
Yes, this small story of your business and this city is such a microcosm for all of this. First of all, it almost sets up kind of what are these different antipodal things, or what are the different opposing poles here. So one thing is, this is really about, when we thought we were going to look, when we were talking the other day, we hadn't looked at the film yet, we thought we were going to look at a film about kind of like emerging business versus new business. This turned out to be a film about government, almost a Kafkaesque, absurdist government thing where you couldn't even tell what was going on, nor could they, versus the poor person trying to get something done. So that's one opposition. The other is then kind of big business versus small, and something that came out in our conversation is how things are financed. San Francisco's been the center of an economy that increasingly has professional finance, venture financing, private equity for biotech and high tech, and we want to preserve that. But suddenly there's all that money rushing in, and smaller businesses are basically through debt and through friends and family and things like that. And yet, if we ask the question, where do jobs come from, there's kind of like an upper limit to how everybody's in tech, because that's like just some people. And then there's probably an upper limit to like some big plant coming to town, because we know big companies have less. And so it really is, once again, small business and small businesses that are finding new niches. And yet there's this structural thing that we love the tech economy, but there's that whole financial thing. So this uncovered so much. And sitting in the middle of all of this as an institution that might help us thrive is the new role of the library, which in the last 15 years or so has found itself as kind of an incubator and an exposer and a way of bringing young people into what these possibilities are, either setting them up for a future or setting them up for great entrepreneurial frustration. So talk to us a little bit about what goes on in this very building.
So the Mix is upstairs. It's a space designed by teens and for teens here at the San Francisco Public Library. We're almost 5 years old now, and while we don't have a smithy where you can do blacksmithing, teens have an opportunity to use their hands in ways that they might not have had an opportunity to do at school, whether it's learning how to use their own personal devices to learn how to make films, whether it's having time to practice using a sewing machine, whether it's having an opportunity to learn how to cook using a Biblio Bistro cooking cart that we have there. A lot of times, I think it's a very difficult time to be a young person. Probably everybody has always said that, but I think as I see some of my friends here in the audience who have been working with young people, and I think that we all agree that this is a very complex world that our young people are in and living in, and we hopefully can help them understand that it takes a lot of practice and a lot of failure and a lot of dusting yourself off to be able to have a successful adult life, especially amidst all this complexity that we've just heard about through Jeremy and Azalina, who are just kind of seeing it on both sides, from the side of the city trying to make things safe and create guidelines and rules. And I know, working for the institution of the library, sometimes those boundaries of working within an institution and within frameworks can be really challenging. And as from your perspective of a small business just trying to thrive and survive, that's the kind of stuff that our young people who are coming to the Mix, who I would say are generally speaking people who, if they weren't at the Mix, they even said this today as a quote, I might be doing other things that I shouldn't be doing. So providing safe spaces for young people to learn how to be adults is really important, because of course the job of young adults in terms of learning, and you kind of saw it in the movie, is that what Matt said is, I like to bang things because if I don't, I'm gonna, do something bad. We want to have these kinds of places where part of what young people do in order to become adults is they test boundaries and they push. And so to provide as many places as possible in their lives where they can be around supportive adults who can help them, help guide them. I think more and more every day, the library is all about literacy, and we talk a lot about 21st century literacy, and that might sound like kind of jargony, and really what it means is to provide access to print literacy, tech literacy, and just really having an opportunity to be with people. One of the things that we do, I see one of our teaching artists here, so I'm going to call her out in the audience, Taylor, who is able to work one-on-one with a young person to hear their ideas and help point them in a direction that might help them navigate this place. So kind of going full circle, I hope I've answered your question, that really what's happened, I'd say in the last 15 years in public libraries around the United States, is they have become more community centers. Here at the San Francisco Public Library, we only have a makerspace for teens. Hopefully at some point that will change, but there are libraries, for example, around the country that have makerspaces, that have these opportunities for people to build literacies that might be going away, such as as you guys all know, there are many programs that used to be vocational programs, vocational schools. There's this big push toward tech and learning that is really geared toward only certain kinds of learners. I think we really need to go back and get more of these fabrication technologies and have young people have access to them so they can learn and thrive.
Let me throw this kind of agitation out there. This film really is about the culture that a city chooses. And it's choosing this culture not just because culture is nostalgic, but it's where we're headed. Our talk tonight was framed urban manufacturing nostalgia or necessity. And so kind of coded into that, it's like, well, is there something about urban manufacturing or making that is not the future of manufacturing? So there's that kind of nostalgic thing. But on the flip side, all of this bit about kind of making, it may actually be the way that we prepare people for lifelong learning. At a time of completely rapid change, there's a sense of agency that you get when you think you have control over things, or they're using 3D printers, or they're doing audio stuff in there, or even this notion that I've been hammering away at something for 500 years. There's something that we're teaching here. So I guess one of the questions, and perhaps we'll start with you, Jeremy, because you get to represent the bureaucracy here, is what are the kind of choices, what does this suggest to us about the choices we're making about how we can prepare people for the future? Because this seems to be as much about the culture of how you get people prepared for a time of constant change as it is about the particular economics of starting something, or perhaps preparing people to understand that we're always going to be starting something and having these skills as we move forward.
Well, I can't wait for Cathy's answer on this, but I think it's a really good question, and I mean, I'm not saying that. It was literally the question I wanted to ask you is what is more about the connection between the young people that you work with or the programs that you administer and the real world or whatever's out there. Because sometimes what I'm doing, it really doesn't feel very real or connected to the people that we're ostensibly serving. So I would like to draw that connection a little more closely. And understand what some of the youth perspectives are. But I think in terms of the culture of the city that we're creating, there is a lot of cachet, I think, and value placed on maker spaces, and folks might be familiar with SF Made. It's a trade organization in the city for manufacturing, and they started in 2009, I think, and every year they almost double. They just keep growing in membership. So there's 600 or 700 businesses that are members of this organization, and there's Human Made, which is a sort of nonprofit evolution of the tech shop where people can come and use tools and take classes and training. And so I think there's a lot of value in the maker culture and in locally sourced foods and businesses and small businesses. Just how do you institutionalize that is the challenge, right? How do you codify that in whether it's zoning codes, or how do you develop the accelerator funds like to support the businesses and whatnot?
It's interesting to throw out there interesting other models. For example, in New York, there's the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is a large industrial facility, not unlike, say, our Pier 70 or our waterfront stuff, but the city of New York inherited it for $1. So it's the landlord. And then it's able to curate people in at below market rates. And what they found, there's a group there called the Pratt Center for Community Development, and what they found was by curating these kinds of businesses, and they could be food businesses, light manufacturing businesses, they're building advanced armor for the military, which is something between being a seamstress and working in nanomaterials, but these tended to create, say, $60,000 a year jobs as opposed to $35,000 a year service jobs, which then kept middle class in and gave people spending money. So what they saw was by creating space for these kinds of jobs, you were creating the middle class, which then you didn't have to have housing fight jobs because it actually helped both, but the lucky thing was the city was the landlord, so they didn't have to worry about it was going to become housing or it was going to become an expensive biotech startup, right? So that's a model that we had. Can we ever have a model like that here? Or
yes.
is it too far gone?
I think a lot of the land is no longer owned by the city, right? But a lot of the land is being rapidly developed and upzoned. And so in the difference between what people can develop today and what developers want to develop, there's a lot of margin and there's a lot of room for negotiating. So what we see is in some of these big developments like Pier 70 or Mission Rock, and a lot of the new program developments coming in Central Soma, PDR is required, right? Or they work closely with a local business or a local nonprofit to make sure they're the tenants. I think the challenge is there's not enough spaces where we can control the rents, right? Like $2 a square foot is sort of the max kind of assumed rent that a lot of small businesses or makers can pay. $4 is the market rate, and labs and biotech firms can pay $5 or $6 on the square foot. So it's how do you, even if we do have that space, it's like we need to be the landlords and that, or somehow control it, and that's the trick.
What, tell us a little bit about what took off, because what I think we all found amazing on the call the other day is and I realize it's difficult, but you're also an example of what in this whole maker, manufacturer, and creative world there's demand for, because you're both providing product through distribution to people like Whole Foods, you're employing people, and there's kind of a real relationship between what you're building and what people downtown want. So what are you kind of learning about what there's interest in, and kind of related to that is if you were king or queen, what might you have the city do differently with respect to small businesses? So, because you probably would have some policy recommendations for them, or perhaps what not to do.
Well, the thing about the model of the business that we have is very unique. We started off as wanting to tell the story about the food. Then we moved up to how can we get this story accessible not just to the small group of people that can afford to pay X amount of money to buy food, right? Because it's expensive to make food. And then from that, by where we have our facility right now, which is in Bayview on 3rd Street. There's a project at the end of the street on Fitzgerald. And we, inside the project, there's a high school, Commission High. And then we decided we should gather the community that we are in Bayview and the children at the school. How can we bring them in to our little household and show them the accessibility of what we're providing and giving, and hopefully from that it create this ripple effect that the city will find out about small businesses like us, what we're doing back to the community, and will help us and will allow us to maybe give some extra help from this amount that we're putting out back there through pro bono. We're teaching these kids how to grow hydroponically, so they're learning skill to know how to grow indoor. Not only that, we allow mothers that wants to start at the farmers market that do not have the resource or capital to come in and get that information from us, and able to provide a safe space, fully equipped space to do that. But it's been a very challenging time. Malia Cohen was the supervisor at that time, and she was very excited about wanting to help women entrepreneur like us, but the whole idea just fell apart. It didn't go far. But that's the not such a positive side of the story, right? I mean, we also try to go out there and talk with these kids in school about what we're doing. I mean, again, the focus is about accessibility. City wants to help big businesses because it helps them generate all this income that they can easily get. Small businesses like us, we just get cramped, basically. But our focus and our value is very different. I mean, when you talk about food right now, I mean, my business model is very different, but they will put so much money into app delivery service that these people have millions of dollars in investing money that we don't have at all. But this is the thing, the city has to choose within the small businesses or the big businesses, but the big businesses only give this much of accessibility or information or history or just some kind of human connection. But, the big companies just bring them money. So back again to that same story, like if a corporation happy to make cities' life easy and give them X amount of money, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, that's just my perspective. I don't know, like, there's so much bureaucratic in running these small businesses, but
Yeah, I think you've eloquently pointed out there's a rich ecosystem here, right? I mean, at this point, everybody in the tech world knows, oh, there's an ecosystem around tech, and you have startups, and you have the legal people and the money, and then it grows, and we use that. But what you're describing is for rich urban development, for there to be both placemaking and exciting places to go and vibrant culture, there is, in fact, this whole ecosystem around small business of explaining to kids the history and the story of food, and then why you'd want to do that, and how it weaves into the community. And you can imagine there's a whole set of things. How do you make it easier to start these things? The biggest reason that small businesses have trouble is it's actually credit is really expensive for small businesses, but not for large businesses, and we don't really have mechanisms to address that. There's all sorts of ways of how do you train and give capacity to these things. So you're describing almost a spec that, even though it's easy to imagine why you need all the big business stuff, and in many ways San Francisco must be the toughest place in the nation to do that, because New York it's cheaper in Brooklyn than the Bronx, and there's the Navy Yard. We're probably the best example of the toughest part here. But it does point out that if you're going to do kind of a rich form of urban development, this is so completely necessary to things.
But the positive side is San Francisco actually one of the great city to be able to have these big companies like all these new wave company with millions of dollars investing money versus small businesses like us. We just have to get, I feel like, this is just my opinion, we just have to get the city to help bind this together, because as a small businesses, we going directly to the consumer or teaching that skill directly to the people that wanting it or want to learn about it and want to hear it, right? With the big company, they just channeling this financial aspect of it, and then the whole thing is how do you combine these two together? My business is a passion-driven business. I'm so passionate about what I do, and I just keep telling the story while hustling, making food on the side of it. But at the same time, these big businesses, they actually our customers. So there is a togetherness. But then, how can the city help us bring that closer by not maybe tax us like crazy, maybe put some of that weight, or maybe not make this all building a space so difficult to small businesses. There's a lot of those ways, but those are political stuff that we won't get to it today. But yeah, that's just the dilemma. And maybe when I was watching him, I was ready to cry because I can feel their heartache. It's a very powerful thing that he's trying to preserve, but the city is not really helping. Even though they see it, they get it, they're trying to make him feel good about it for that moment, but the next day they just want to scream all over again. And that's what we do. That's what small businesses go through almost every single day. That's just sorry.
We could let her go all night. It'd be fine with me. But
it looks like you're about to say something.
Well, I just have a question. It's more, and maybe it's for Jeremy, and it's probably for people who aren't in this room, but I've always been curious about those community benefit districts. I see it all over Market Street. I see it in this area. And I thought the idea behind that was exactly what Azalina is describing, was that these businesses that have come in who are very highly capitalized and have a lot of money, and in exchange for some tax benefits, that they give back to the city. And so I think this is more of just a rhetorical open question. How can that, without too much bureaucracy, directly help someone like Azalina and her businesses and give her incentives in order to continue to provide living wages and other good benefits and fringe benefits for her employees that make it all just kind of this beautiful dream? So,
are there any municipal finance experts in the house? Okay, good. So I think there's two things you said there. There's the tax breaks and benefits, which I can't speak to as much, but I'm curious about. And then there's the community benefit district, and I'll try to keep it short. But if you heard of a business improvement district, it's the same idea where businesses or property owners pay into a fund. It's a sort of a public-private, quasi-public-private fund, and that fund can do things in the public realm, like clean sidewalks or help with trash or have community guides. You may have seen them around town. Things that we would like the city to do, but they can't always afford to do. Mm-hmm. And one of the most exciting things I think about CBDs is like this sort of programmatic stuff. And we were working on setting one up in the Mission. There's like 15 or 16 of them in the city. Many of my colleagues work with them every day. They're really valuable sort of vehicles for connecting with people. And so some of them have like marketing funds or technical assistance for businesses, so each of those CBDs can choose how they allocate the funding, and it's up to the property owners in that district to vote on what they want to do with it. So there's a sort of a different level of politics, more like neighborhood level, but I think it would be great. And yeah, but it just depends on the local priorities.
So that's also a mechanism that distributes it out, gets central decision making out. It's kind of right.
It takes it away from, well, it adds sort of more. It empowers, I guess, the neighborhood.
And it takes away from the central. Right. It is a distributed mechanism. I think we have audience questions.
Yes, we have about 7 minutes. So, are there any questions in the from the audience?
Hello. Two comments. Basically, the new online PDR space that's coming online seems to be going to big businesses. I was excited when Pier 70 was coming online, and half of that went to Uber right off the bat. And if you look in through the door, it's all people at computers. And of course, we know the reason PDR is so expensive is because half the space is being actually used as office space.
Is that a Jeremy question?
Sorry, did you?
This is the issue that, okay, it's PDR space, but
no, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right.
Cheat.
Yeah, people totally cheat. And, we don't hear about it unless we're told about it, right? Or there's a limit to how we can enforce that. But yeah, whether it's legal or not, it's the tech-driven or just the well-financed firms that are driving up those costs, and it's something we need to deal with. And I think, enforcement is one way of dealing with the cheating, but I think there's more structural issues that we need to kind of address that we were talking about before. But
what are you learning from the kids that are working with kind of all these forms of authoring and empowerment technology in terms of like what they want to go off and create? Like, are there signals from what you're seeing from young people about what turns them on and how they want to express themselves?
I would say that what teens are really empowered by like what they want. Like right now, they're still very much in their front brains a little bit. So it's like, I want to make this cool thing that I want to wear. Or I want to make this cool bag. And I think that when they start to use the machines, like a vinyl cutter or a sewing machine or a 3D printer, I think what the first thing that they're starting to learn is, wow, this takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of practice. So I think more than anything, just having that opportunity to practice something that they might not have had access to and starting to understand that learning is failing a lot, that we learn through, we make mistakes and we keep on going and we keep on trying, and having people who are supportive and telling you it's okay. And even me, who makes mistakes all the time, just being acknowledging that part of learning is stumbling and falling and getting back up. And so I think also what's happening, and I see this all the time, is we don't necessarily know what's happening with the learning. The learning's like planting seeds in all these young people, and they might leave the mix. They might be 18, 19, 20, 22, 23 years old, and then they come back and tell us what they've done, and that's something that they learned while they were there has inspired them to move on. And probably they're not going to talk to me about it, but they're probably going to talk to Taylor and the other teaching artists and the librarians who are there one-on-one and them in the space, and they're going to know more about that, because it is kind of like I think there's a lot of confidence building that's happening with young people, and it's I think sometimes really difficult. I think that's one really great thing about a space like the Mix, a community space like that this is a safe space for young people. They're not getting grades like they're getting at school. And so they can try different things on and try things without the pressure of having to say, I've made this choice. So I think that we need to just, what I'm seeing is that opportunity to be able to say to a young person who might be reluctant to do something, that just keep trying to connect to that young person to get them to try as they feel safer in the space. It's almost like any of you who are parents and have tried to like give your child some food that they might not want to try, sometimes you have to try again and again and again, and at some point they might say, oh yeah, I like that avocado. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
It's interesting that this whole conversation almost takes place in the context of, say, the last 10 years of the maker movement, right?
Yeah.
So if we go back, when Dale Doherty kind of started Make Magazine and the maker movement, it was a realization, 15 years ago or so, that we were kind of over-indexing for things we could do with code. We had built these tools that democratized the creating of code because we had personal computers and then mobile stuff, and it was just beginning to be the case that we were doing the same for the physical world, right? We had Arduinos, we had 3D printing, we had CNC machines, and we were, and kids like to make stuff. So the maker movement started to become as a way of expressing yourself and making things, and immediately that blossomed as an educational thing because suddenly there was this sense of agency and what I could create, and also the realization that we were all consumers in our society, and where did this stuff come from? And now we got close to making it, right? So then that blossomed into, well, look at all of these tools. These tools could be used for manufacturing. We could have local businesses, and right, just as we have local distributed everything else, and there was this whole question about local making, local manufacturing, this other sets of jobs, and this realization that not everybody was going to be a coder, which was kind of what the 2016 election was about, which is like, what about everybody else that aren't stuffed in the coast doing coding? And so then we became this whole question about urban manufacturing and local manufacturing, and now as that plays out, that's a very rich thing. It has great educational stuff. We have great demand for artisanal goods, right? And then we're up against this other issue of we're so great at professional finance in this city. How do these things coexist? And so we're showing up a little bit in the third inning of that conversation, or the third quarter, I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
I think we have to really think about diversity, gender, and climate change, because in Los Angeles, they just passed a street vending ordinance. Now, you have 15,000 street vendors every day that are legally there.
Yeah.
But they've been there for the past 20 years. There's a lot of women of color trying to make a living. But that group was never allowed to really exist in the public out of the city, but now they can. And I think because of climate change and the different ways and patterns of living and diversity, you're going to have these changing making techniques. It's not all going to be street vending. It's not all going to be making. It's going to be street vending, selling on street corners. It might be something different, but we don't even know what that's going to be. We need to have that space for it to happen organically.
I think part of what this points out is, so one way of creating space for people is literally to create office space, PDR space. You're talking about prototyping space, like, in other words, street vending space or pop-up space, right? And so another way of doing all this would be zoning stuff where it's just so much less expensive to get in and easier to try stuff or fail or not before you even get to, I have to go rent a space for a couple of years.
One more?
Yeah.
Hi, I would be very interested in hearing from a lot of the young people who are growing up in San Francisco about what their experiences are growing up as a native here, especially in the shadow of tech giants, who are not maybe being told explicitly, but are basically being shown that they don't matter unless they are in tech or making a certain amount of money. And not just them, but essentially, their whole family. Doesn't really matter, doesn't even really exist if they aren't making a certain amount of money. And basically what their experiences are growing up with that type of pressure. And then also, what does it feel like to be a San Francisco native in basically a sea of migrants, of people who've moved here for work? I'm from Oakland, I'm from East Oakland, and it's not a good feeling when you say I'm from East Oakland and people look at you like, wow, a native. Not a good feeling. So I would love to hear stories about teens growing up here to understand what their experiences are, and if they've had to move, how they've had to fight to stay, and how basically they've been impacted generationally by the changes that are going on here.
Cathy, is this what you come up against as you're talking to your population in this building?
I think I see it, everything. I mean, that's one of the beauties of the public library is that people they can be who they choose to be in our spaces. I mean, anecdotally, I know a lot about some of the young people who are there, but I would say what Taylor says, of course, is completely spot on in terms of there is a lot of stress in their lives because they're in this one place that they can go to that is completely free, but yet their outside lives might be so totally chaotic. And I think that it's really true that they're hearing these messages that have been really kind of institutionalized in our society through this whole meritocratic practice that we have of putting this super high value of a college education. And if you can't do that, somehow you are not worthy. And we all know that that's like completely an imagined thing that people have made up, that many of us have, kind of gone on that treadmill, myself included, as a parent. And you kind of have to, of course, then you step back and you're like, wait a minute, everybody has value. Everybody is important. We're all equals. We all have values and attributes and good things that we can bring into the world. And that's really part of what I'm doing every day is trying to really help create good citizens. I mean, people, or I should say they all are good people, but that creating citizens help to create citizens that understand that you are worthy, you have value. There are things that you can do in this world. You can be a success. You don't have to go to this university that you've heard about that somebody has said in your class that's the highest value. There's other ways that you can be educated. And I think that it's really true. I think what you were saying before, Peter, about these pathways that have been lost, these manufacturing pathways, I think in order to bring back that middle class that has been completely ignored and I should say it hasn't been as valued, or at least demonstrably as valued, so that Azalina, for example, has to pay so much, and she's doing this out of a passion of love and is giving a lot of people here in San Francisco a living wage. We need to be able to promote businesses like that provide people different kind of pathways. And myself as an adult who's working with young people, hopefully I can be a broker to these young people to help them find a pathway. Say somebody who's not going to college, they have incredible skills and maybe they can have an apprenticeship at an organization like Azalinas so that they can get some skills and they can get practice and they can build confidence and they can learn about like what it's like to go to a job every day and the things that you need to do and that you need to make up on time and that you need to get a good night's sleep and you need to maybe pack your lunch so that you don't take too long for lunch in the middle of the day. All of these things are just such important attributes that we as a society have to value and have to say that they are important, and we have to let young people and their families know that they matter, even if they've been, I think that that's another thing, is that it's very stressful when you have been a family that has lost, even all of us can attest how expensive it is in San Francisco. Even those of us who have a place to live can attest just how difficult, it's stressful it is. And so just imagine that it just multiplies so much when you have not equitably been able to take part in the same opportunities as, say, somebody who's coming in, who comes and has a college degree, as a 22-year-old is getting a $150,000 a year job. And I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I know for a fact that that does happen, and that is something that has caused this disruption. And so I think what we have to do is think, those of us who are in any position of power whatsoever, is in our being progressive, is have to acknowledge that disruption and what it has done for people who don't find themselves, kind of on the top.
I think we should thank the film festival for screening this picture. It's amazing how much of ourselves and this conflict we find in all of this. I was looking at this, and it was like, this was completely like a Kafka-esque kind of thing. Here they are, or like Camus with the myth of Sisyphus. Here he is trying to climb up, and all these agencies are passing the thing off. He really has been hammering away at something for 500 years. That's kind of a description of where we're at and our striving as a city. And just as that film is unresolved, and it's not clear exactly what's going to happen, so here are we. But boy, this is really set up kind of a great microcosm of this striving. Here we are with mechanisms to support us, and here's our government in the middle working this thing through. So this has been, I want to thank you all, and thank you for screening that, and for all of us finding such a story in it. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much.